sound. And when I fall, you tied a rope to me. You're blessing me every day. I was down with an illusion, like a sparrow with broken wings. But now I shine with your reflection on me. I'm getting back up on my feet. That you showed up was written in my palm. You are a statement, explode like a bomb. I get to push myself to victory. You make me winner. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. Yes, I'm the winner, yeah.
Okay, I don't have a nice fade out that works for this, but welcome everybody to the very first live Time for Coffee TV interview. Woo! I am so pumped to introduce you to my next guest because she's just so cool. She is so cool, and she makes engineering cool. And you are going to learn so much. I have learned so much preparing for this interview that I did not know about engineering. And she's going to make you love it. So let's bring her into the stream, and I'm going to tell you about her when she joins. There she is, Deborah. How's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, great. And I want to let everybody know that I gave you, gosh, how many hours heads up that we were going to be doing this live, Deborah? Was it like 12 hours? I don't even know if it was that. I think you were like on your way to go to sleep. And I'm like, hey, Deborah, would you? Because she, by the way, she's joining us from Australia. So
Yes.
today.
Yes, I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, Andrea. And it's 8 a.m. on our side, so not too bad.
8 a.m. So it was
Yes.
like, honestly, sometime yesterday, and I thought, let me push myself outside my comfort zone. I have never done this before. I've never done a Time for Coffee podcast interview live streamed. What the heck? I think Deborah is the kind of woman that would go, I keep calling you Deborah. Brenda. Do you know how many times I was walking my dog before this interview, and I was thinking, I was looking you up because I wanted to message you on LinkedIn, and I kept looking up Deborah, and I'm like, Deborah, I'm like, why am I not finding her?
Why is she not coming up?
Because her name is Brenda. So anyway, I was thinking, I think Brenda is the kind of woman who would appreciate this kind of experience. Am I right?
Yes. I'm all for taking uncomfortable action, taking first, giving it a go. So I'm happy to go through all the tech issues with you and figure this all out. I think it'll be a fantastic discussion today. I'm looking forward to it.
I do too. And I want you to know the reason that we got started late, a couple minutes late, is that all of a sudden my computer started doing weird things. You saw, I was here, I was ready. And I don't know, I probably clicked a button I wasn't supposed to click. And then it wouldn't let me start the broadcast. So I had to reboot the whole computer. And I've also misplaced my phone, Brenda, somewhere in my house. So I couldn't even message you over LinkedIn to say, hey, this is what's going on. So apologies. This is just it's like the wild, wild west. We're just going.
Let it flow.
Go with the flow. So I want to let our listeners and our viewers know what we're going to be doing here, we're going to start off with what I call the espresso shots interview. These are 10 questions that I ask my guests to help usually our listeners, but this will be our viewers and our listeners, learn how to break into the industry of my guest, in this case, engineering. And then I'm going to say goodbye to you. So I'm going to read an introduction. Then I'll say goodbye to you at the end. And then I'm going to introduce you again. It's going to sound remarkably similar to what I had just said, but it'll be tweaked a teeny bit. And that's when we're going to get into the main Time for Coffee interview, Brenda, in which we dig into what you are doing now in your current job, getting into some of the engineering stuff, and how you built your career. And then I'll say goodbye to you and we'll be done. How does
Sounds
that
great.
sound?
Sounds good, Andrea.
Okay, awesome. Well, here we go, Brenda. And I want to make sure I'm going to pronounce your name correctly. It's Denbesten, is that right?
Denbesten.
Denbesten. Okay, I'm really glad I double checked. We've actually been communicating with one another over LinkedIn, but we haven't had the opportunity to actually
Verbal
speak.
discussion. Yes.
Yeah, to have a real discussion. So here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Hey there, Java junkies. Welcome back to another Espresso Shots episode of T4C. If you're interested in breaking into engineering, especially as a young woman, then this is the episode for you, because my next guest has been a chemical engineer on and off for the last 15 years, and her mission is to inspire girls and young women to enter the engineering field. But before I introduce you to Brenda Denbesten, I want to make sure you've signed up for the Java Junkies Journal. For the Java Junkies Journal, that's Time for Coffee's weekly newsletter that features career advice, insights, and inspiration that you won't find anywhere else. Just head over to the Time for Coffee website at time4coffee.org, and the sign-up box is right there. Now, my espresso drinking engineering lovers, please grab your mug and take a chug of your favorite caffeinated brew, because it's time for another caffeinated career conversation. And my guest is Brenda Denbesten, whose title is Continuous Improvement Manager of Continuous Manufacturing at Orica, which, in case you're unfamiliar with it, is the world's largest provider of commercial explosives and innovative blasting systems to the mining, quarrying, oil and gas, and construction markets. It's also a leading supplier of sodium cyanide for gold extraction and a specialist provider of ground support services in mining and tunneling. Brenda joined Orica in 2016 after spending several years working at BHP as a metallurgist, working with uranium and copper. And prior to BHP, she worked for 4 years as a metallurgist at ANSTRO, which stands for Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization. Lastly, but not leastly, Brenda is the creator of Chronicles of a Female Engineer. It is a YouTube series that demystifies what an engineer does, how to get ahead in the industry from entry level to management, and develop a mindset that thrives in traditional and male-dominated fields. Brenda, welcome to Time for Coffee. Are you caffeinated and ready to go?
Yes. Thank you so much, Andrea. Great to be with you today.
It's great to be with you. Do you have a favorite coffee, Brenda?
I do like a latte, Andrea. I think that is my favorite one.
Awesome. And I know we should let our listeners know. I know you're joining us today from Melbourne in Victoria.
In Australia.
In Australia, where it is 8 o'clock or thereabouts, 8:15
Yes.
in the morning, and it's 4:15 my time. But it's also, not only are you in a different time zone, but you're in a different season.
I am in summer, so I can see the sun is shining, and I'm in the future too, so it's already a day ahead of you.
What's it like ahead of us today?
It's
What
the
is
future's looking bright. It's looking good.
awesome, awesome. And how is the coronavirus there? We're doing this interview in mid-January 2021. How are things down under?
So in Australia, we've probably got it a lot better than some of the other areas across the world. So we're mainly out of lockdown in the majority of our areas. We're now seeing sporadic lockdowns when we've got a few small clusters, just to sort of contain it and prevent extended community transmission. But nowhere, we're not even in the hundreds in terms of cases that are active at the moment. So really blessed to be where we're at right now compared to what we're seeing
Absolutely.
globally.
Yes, yeah, a lot better, like 5 million times better than it is here in the
That's
US.
correct.
So, Brenda, let us dive into our 10 espresso shots. These are the 10 questions that I ask guests to help our young listeners, our college students, and our young professionals learn how to break into, in this case, the engineering industry. So, first question is, what entry-level jobs, Brenda, are available to young people who want to get into engineering?
Yes, so people who want to get into engineering need to start getting their experience under their belt as soon as possible, Andrea. And I do try to tell my students as soon as they can to try and get their foot in the door. And this can be anywhere from, let's start on campus, on the college campus. Your professors, your lecturers, they currently sometimes have projects running on campus. So reaching out to them, understanding if they've got anything that they're running on campus and getting involved in that. The labs are another great entry point just to get your foot in the door. And look out for some companies that advertise throughout the year that are looking for skills and students. Sometimes opportunities are paid, sometimes they may be unpaid, but I really recommend doing what you can to get your foot in the door. I had the lucky opportunity, I suppose, that outside of my university, there was a BHP technology center that was present at that time. I did my university in Newcastle in Australia, which is just close to Sydney. And I was able to do a few minutes, a shift role, which essentially was an 8-hour role, either in the morning shift, afternoon, or night shift. And I could use that and juggle that with my lectures at the same time. So finding something that works well with your studies and also during your holiday periods is much advised.
Excellent. I just banged your CV against the microphone because I wanted to see what your first title was after you graduated from the University of Newcastle, and it was metallurgist. What
Yes.
are the titles that our young listeners should be looking out for on job boards, on LinkedIn, that would signal to them that it's an entry-level position?
Yes. So oftentimes junior is a keyword. And in the description, you'll see that they're looking for perhaps graduate. In Australia, a lot of things will say graduate engineer required or entry level professional. And those are the type of things that you'd look for. In my industry, chemical engineers, perhaps you'd look for a plant engineer, you'd look for a chemical engineer, a metallurgist, a process engineer. So those are the sort of roles in chemical engineering. Now, mechanical engineering, software engineering, civil engineering, all the different types of engineering disciplines would have different sort of nuances for their entry level positions. So my experience is very much a chemical engineering experience, but you'll find similar parallels across the other disciplines as well.
And that is so similar to other industries, whether it's advertising, marketing, the nonprofit world. It's often it's insider lingo, and it could be even unique to the company that you're working for, that they use different titles.
Correct, that's right. So keeping it abroad when you're searching for those roles is helpful.
Great. So, Brenda, what is a useful hard and soft skill that you look for in the young people you hire? And I also want to let our listeners know that on your YouTube series, you devote a ton of time in one episode to talking about the importance of soft skills for an engineer. So I'm guessing your list is going to be super long on the soft skills side, probably longer even than it is on the hard skills.
Certainly. So look, typically for engineering roles, you're going to have your analytical skills, right? So your degree is your foundation. We know you're a student. We know you haven't had too much time to dip your feet in the water experience-wise. So really, we're just looking for some decent grades. We're looking for attention to detail and, some strong analytical background. But in terms of your soft skills, communication is a key skill that we want. You want to be able to discuss your proposal, understand what the problem is, talk about certain solutions or root causes that you found to the problem. Additionally, you need to have a willingness to learn. So you need to be coachable. You need to be an active listener. It helps to be also someone who likes to collaborate, because engineers, although we do a lot of the design work and the deep diving, you need to be able to work with others. So being someone who's a team player and can collaborate with multidisciplinary employees is a very helpful skill as well.
You also listed out, and this was not a test, by the way. I didn't expect Brenda to be able to rattle off the very long list that she had in her video. But just so you benefit from what she said in the video, she also mentioned the importance of curiosity and asking questions and not being afraid to ask questions.
This is very, very important. And particularly because, like I mentioned, I mean, I still ask questions even 15 years later, right? And asking questions really allows you to come in with a frame of mind that, okay, perhaps I do know most of what's going on around here, but what could we improve on? What could we do better? It's not always, looking in the rearview mirror at how we've always done things. And maybe that's my current role, that current hat sitting there. But it's about having that curiosity. How can we do things better? How can we improve? How can we make it safer, better, and make it a better experience in general?
Terrific. So you've kind of touched on this already, but is someone's major a deciding factor to get into engineering, Brenda? In other words, if they haven't studied it, if they haven't majored in chemical engineering or electrical engineering or civil engineering or computer science, is it a deal breaker if they want to get into that field?
Yes, so I would say typically you do need to have that foundation to enter into engineering. Particularly as an engineer, you do need to be licensed, and you need to have gone through your full degree for that. I will say, however, that amongst the disciplines, so I could perhaps apply for a job as a process engineer, or I could get a role as a mechanical engineer, despite the fact that I've got a chemical engineering degree. So this is because the skills are transferable. So depending upon your experience and your application in that industry, your experience may be sufficient to transfer it in and work as a mechanical engineer. So I've got friends who I graduated with who did chemical engineering roles and are now working as mechanical engineers in nuclear plants. They're working as quality control engineers for Boeing, and in different applications. So once you're in the industry and you've had a bit of experience under your belt, you can transfer across disciplines.
Excellent. What about a graduate school degree? And I noticed on your resume, on your CV, that you do not have a graduate degree that I am aware of. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is it necessary, less so for getting your foot in the door, but more so as you move up the ladder, as you progress maybe into the C-suite, into executive positions? Is it important to have that grad school degree? And if so, Brenda, which ones would you recommend?
So you're referring to masters, like a master's? Yes. So look, I think this really depends on what your career goals are. So what do you want to do? So because I remember this was a question I grappled with as a student, because, you've just finished your 4-year degree, you may as well do another year and a half and add your master's to it, right? But it really depends. A lot of employers don't look favorably upon that, because they want you to have the experience. They want you to have had some time in the field to understand how things really work, and then come back and do a graduate degree and get your master's. So you do find it's much more useful to have done that a little bit later and to get your master's if you want to end up in management. So if you want to definitely pursue a corporate C-suite career, then an MBA, a master's in business, would be advisable to get. And if you want to maybe deeper dive into your discipline, so if I wanted to do maybe a master's in engineering management, or in an environmental field, so if I wanted to pivot into an environmental application, maybe I'd do a master's in environmental management and seek out a role in that aspect. So it really depends on what your career plan is, and I'd recommend students get experience under their belt first, determine if they really enjoy that field, and then after a bit of time, then pursue the master's or the graduate education.
100%. And honestly, Brenda, that is advice that I personally would give to any person who is graduating from college, even if they know, oh gosh, I definitely want to be an engineer and I definitely want to, whatever it is,
Yes.
because you don't know unless you do. You don't know unless you try. And the worst thing that happens is that you get it a couple of years later. And actually, I noticed at least one of the firms where you've worked, it may even be at your current firm, they will either help to pay for your advanced degree or pay for the whole thing. Is that right?
Yes, so certainly different employers have got that option where you can be working. What they do is they allow you to study. So you do your studies, and once you've passed, essentially, they will pay you back. So really, you have that discussion with your manager, discuss your career plans, talk about additional education and what your intentions are there. And there's certainly, that's some of the perks to get them to pay you to do that additional study. So definitely, that's an avenue that can save you your wallet and help you get tangible experience, and then use that experience in your additional extra education as well.
Oh my gosh.
So that's certainly an option.
Absolutely. What about life experiences, Brenda? So these are the experiences that we have outside the classroom, whether it's traveling, whether it's growing up in a large family or a small family, whether it's being part of different clubs, whether it's having that little kit that we got as kids for science experiments or chemistry or whatever it is. What type of life experiences do you think our young listeners who are interested in going into chemical engineering or engineering writ large, should they try to cultivate while they're in college before they get out into the working world?
Yes, that's a great question. I think travel is a big one for me. I think international travel has got a lot of things that are helpful in your engineering career. You're being thrown into a culture that you're not familiar with. You don't know the language, perhaps. So you're sort of in a new environment. You have to sort of learn your way around. Maybe you need to learn a couple of new words. You need to lean on people that understand things more than you. So international travel is experience that is really great, because once you get into the industry, again, you're not too sure of everything. You don't know everything. You need to rely and ask questions. You need to find your way around. You need to ask people how they got to where they got to, and what's the lay of the land in this job and in this role. And yes, I think travel is definitely one. I also think getting involved in clubs on campus and in your community, or maybe Engineers Without Borders, some sort of projects that help you work with teams and execute and have a little part that you play and you're responsible for. And again, even things that appear mundane. So for example, maybe waitressing. Someone may be like, how does waitressing help me in an engineering degree? But I like to think that, as a waitress, you have to juggle, customer service is important. You need to keep your customers happy. You need to deal with issues. So whenever the food doesn't taste good, oh, we're so sorry about that. We'll get that sorted right away. So dealing with sudden changes to the program, as well as also engaging with your team members, working as a team. Hey, I've got this. Hey, can you handle my table? I've actually never been a waitress, but I'm just assuming that those are the things that you'd have to kind of juggle those balls. So this experience all comes into effect and comes in handy when you're now entering into that engineering role.
I love that. I also have never been a waitress, but I've certainly eaten in a lot of restaurants and shops and had waiters and waitresses around me. And I think you're absolutely right. Being able to multitask, being able to deal with different personalities, right? And as a woman in a male-dominated industry, I'm sure having those diplomatic skills, cultural skills, come in very handy. Brenda, what is the best part of your current job as a continuous improvement manager at Orica?
So I think the best part of my job is really being able to standardize systems and processes that just make things work better. So my last project was really around upgrading our management of change system. Our legacy system, or the historical system, was becoming outdated and the software wasn't going to be supported any longer. So really being able to implement a new solution that's common across all our sites, and has everyone doing everything the same way. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with standardization, Andrea, but it really comes to a head in a global company where you're operating in multiple countries, numerous sites, and everyone's doing things in a different way to each other. So the simplicity that comes through with standardizing systems and processes and having one procedure that people use, one troubleshooting guide, it's just really exciting to know that you've removed layers of complexity and helped people to simplify their day-to-day jobs.
I love, and our listeners, when they do listen to this podcast, will not benefit from having seen Brenda's face, which lit up as she was talking about the idea that things would be standardized. That really excites you.
It does, because I think I've seen the complexities of when, we like it this way, but we do it that way, and this is how we've always done it. So yes, with change comes a lot of barriers and a few hiccups to walk through. But once that stability is achieved, it's definitely worthwhile.
Excellent. So every job, every industry has aspects that really suck, Brenda. What is the part of your current job that sucks the most?
I have to really dig deep for this one. I think right now, what sucks for me, because I'm a big people person, is that I don't have a direct team that I'm managing right now. So my influence is very indirect. So I need to influence managers who have got their sites to give me resources, or to allow my project to be semi-priority on their list where they're running a site and have got multiple priorities. So what sucks there is that I don't have that those people to coach and uplift. And I suppose now, being in a COVID environment with a lot of us still working from home, we're all sort of in that situation where we don't have our direct peers, in the office, having that ability to chat and say, how are you going? What are you working on? What's your challenge at the moment? And really having to go out of our way to maybe get on the phone or get onto Teams or Skype and have a conversation to understand what people are up to, what are they working on, and how are they going, and if they need support.
Yes, that it would be, I mean, for anybody, certainly for extroverts, this is a terrible time to be stuck at home. And unless you've got a very
Yes.
large family, and do you have people around you at home?
Yes, I've got a little boy, a little 3.5-year-old. So he's my little son. And I've got a husband as well, but he works away interstate, which got a bit complex during the pandemic when borders were closing and he was locked in a different state to mine. So certainly there's been different things we've all had to juggle
Yeah,
during our new normal, I guess
our
we'd call
new
it.
normal. Definitely. Is he back now?
He's currently back, yes. So he's
Okay.
currently looking after my little my little
Your
one to
little one.
prevent him from running in here and appearing on camera
All
on
right.
audio.
Well, thank you, Dad. 3 final espresso shots, Brenda. What is the best career advice you've ever gotten?
So the best career advice I've ever gotten is to always try something, especially if you don't know about it. So be willing to try something new. I think it were the exact words. And this came about 5 or 6 years into my career. My mentor sort of said, look, you need to make sure you're not afraid to try something new. There will always be situations that may come across your plate. Put your hand up. Be willing to try, say yes, so feel the fear and do it anyway. Ask questions, and this is why I really embrace the fact of being flexible, saying yes, and figuring it out as you go. And so that's my advice to people at any stage of their careers, because oftentimes I think women in particular, we like to be perfectionists. We like to have our ducks in a row. We like to understand what we're going into and what's involved, and do we really fulfill all 10 requirements. But really jumping in. If you've got 5 or 6, say, okay, I'll learn the 4 as I go. How did people, because everyone is in this position, right? Everyone is figuring it out as they go, but you just don't realize. So that is the best career I've ever received. Feel the fear
I
and do it anyway.
love, love, love that advice. And you proved it yet again when you said yes to doing a live stream podcast interview. So, woohoo, Brenda.
Yes, yes.
Okay, now for the fun question. What movies, if any, or Netflix, Amazon, Hulu streaming shows or books, Brenda, do you think accurately depict your industry?
So what I really liked was Chernobyl. Andrew, have you heard about that one?
Oh my God, it was
Chernobyl.
amazing on HBO, right?
Yes, yes. So that was on HBO and it streamed on, I think, Foxtel in Australia. But essentially, there was a power plant in the Soviet Union which had the largest explosion, a nuclear disaster, essentially. And the scenes in the first and second episodes when the event actually happened in that control room, that really resonated with my industry and typically in control rooms that I've been in as well. So when you see the little indicators, the process control parameters out of specification, and you typically have emergency response plans to bring things back into stability. They chose not to. They chose to deviate from the emergency response plans, and that had just drastic ramifications. So that aspect, that scene, and then the flow-on effect as well, dealing with the community fallout, the health considerations, having to report to newspapers, all that sort of stuff is actually part of the industry and part of the role. So I think that's really something that I resonated with and felt like, wow, this is something that could happen, in my role. So that resonated well, but I don't feel like there's much else in mainstream movies, in reality TV shows that depicts what engineers really do. And I'm passionate about working with film producers to get something out there, right? So
Well,
yes.
hopefully someone will be listening who will want to make a show. Is there even a reality TV show around engineering? The Real Housewives of Chemical Engineering or something like that?
I'm working on a script. I'm working on some things in the background, but there's nothing out there. There's nothing. I mean, I think of like Sex and the City and how they have their sort of little roles in that space. So something that would appeal to millennials, make it fresh and engaging, particularly for women, where things are typically. I mean, you might have a National Geographic series that maybe digs into some pumps and maybe the industrial side of engineering, but really trying to shed a bit of more feminine light on the industry.
See, you said pumps and you had just said Sex in the City. So that made me think of shoes.
Oh, shoes. No.
Manola Blahniks. And I'm thinking, I don't think the engineering boot is going to hold a candle to the great shoes that Carrie Bradshaw wore.
That's classic. No, I was referring to big water pumps or equipment pumps. But yes, that does draw a similar parallel.
That, Brenda, is why I'm not an engineer. That and many other reasons. Okay, final espresso shot. What would Java junkies be surprised to learn about engineering?
So I think Java junkies would be surprised to learn that engineering is very broad. And engineering is probably in the fabric of everything you see around you. So I like to let people know, particularly as chemical engineers, that you can work in a food manufacturing plant. You can make chocolate and work in a distillery and make gin or beer, and work in a petrochemical company, oil and gas, mining, the water industry, so we can clean up your water. In the copper industry, we make copper to go into electrical cables, which powers our houses. So really, without knowing, engineers have been involved in some aspect of most of the things we see around us today. So that's my hot tip.
So cool.
And my
Now,
insider's insight.
had I known that engineers were involved in chocolate making, maybe I would have gone into the field, but I didn't. I didn't until I started preparing for this interview.
I know, right?
Brenda, I'm sorry?
I said it's unkept secret.
Well, we're going to blow the lid off that secret right now and hopefully inspire other young women to get into the field.
Exactly.
Brenda is the creator of the Chronicles of a Female Engineer. It's a YouTube series that demystifies what an engineer does, how to get ahead in industry from entry level to management, and also how to develop a mindset that thrives in traditional and male-dominated fields. Brenda, I want to thank you so much for making time for coffee today with me and the T4C community. This was just wonderful.
You're welcome. I've really enjoyed our discussion.
Woohoo! Okay, one down and one to go. And I saw you jam. Wasn't that little promo kind of nice? I love that music.
Yeah, I like the music.
Right? Me too. It's like every time I listen to it, it just makes me want to dance. So did I mispronounce your name? I didn't see a cringe. Denbesten.
Everything was yes, Denbesten.
Okay. I'm so frustrated that I can't find my phone. I don't know what I did with it, Brenda. So what I wanted to tell our viewers, and if you have your phone, maybe you can see if people are even posting any comments. I wanted to let them know that we will have time for, there we go. Well, Niraj Harsh did post, which was wonderful. I don't know if he is still with us, but I wanted to let him and others know that we will get to your questions if you're still there at the end. At the end, we'll open it up. So here we go, Brenda. I'm going to read the introduction to this. Did I pronounce the name of your company correctly, by the way? It's Orica?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Hey there, Java junkies. Welcome back to another episode of T4C. If you're interested in learning more about what it's like to be an engineer, specifically a chemical engineer, then this is the episode for you, because my next guest has been a chemical engineer for the last 15 years, and her mission is to inspire girls and young women to enter this dynamic and much more diverse and interesting industry than you probably imagined it to be. But before I introduce you to Brenda Denbesten, I want to make sure you've signed up for the Java Junkies Journal. That's Time for Coffee's newsletter that features career advice, insights, and inspiration that you won't find anywhere else. Just head over to the Time for Coffee website at coffee.org, and the sign up box is right there. Now, my Java lovers, please grab your mug and take a chug of your favorite caffeinated brew, because it's time for another caffeinated career conversation. And my guest is Brenda Denbesten, whose title is Continuous Improvement Manager of Continuous Manufacturing at Orica, which, in case you're unfamiliar with it, is the world's largest provider of commercial explosives and innovative blasting systems to the mining, quarrying, oil and gas, and construction markets. It's also a leading supplier of sodium cyanide that's used for gold extraction and a specialist provider of ground support services in mining and tunneling. Brenda joined Orica in 2016 after spending several years working at BHP as a metallurgist, working with uranium and copper. And prior to BHP, she worked for 4 years, also as a metallurgist, at ANSTO, which stands for Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization. Lastly, Brenda provides speaking, mentoring, and coaching services to driven female engineers so they can gain clarity on their unique strengths and skills and get the confidence needed to leverage all of them for maximum impact in the workplace. Brenda, welcome to Time for Coffee. Are you still caffeinated and ready to go?
Hello, hello, hello. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. How are you today?
I am great. I am great. I should let our listeners know, our viewers, if they tuned in earlier, are already aware of this. Brenda is also joining me in a live stream. This is the first time that I've ever done this for a Time for Coffee podcast interview. We are live streaming this interview on LinkedIn on the brand new Time for Coffee TV show. I had to
So cool.
what? It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. And Brenda, if you couldn't pick up from her accent, is joining us from Australia.
Yes, I am. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. So it's a little bit early here and in the future from your from your time zone.
And I looked it up. Actually, I have a globe right next to my desk, just off from where I'm gesturing over to it, and looked up Melbourne, Victoria, and it's the most southeastern corner of Australia, about 87 miles or 140 kilometers from Phillip Island, which I'd never heard of.
Yes, and they've got lots of lovely little penguins that come over at Phillip Island, and you can see the little. It's really a nice little spot. You must come
Amazing.
visit.
I would love to come visit. In fact, my son has been obsessed with Australia. My son is going to be 17 later this month and is absolutely obsessed since I think like the 3rd grade, when he had to do a report on another country, and he did the report on Australia and learned G'day. That was like he's like, I can speak Australian, Mom.
That's classic.
It is classic, but he is still obsessed and still wants to go. So one day we'll see. I am joining you, in case you don't know, from Maryland, which is on the East Coast of the United States. It's very near to the US Capitol, where there will be an inauguration of a new president in about 8 days from now.
Very exciting for America.
And for the world, I think. So I also want our listeners to know, and our viewers to know, well, really, it's more relevant for our listeners, that if they want to learn how to break into engineering, they should check out the show notes for this episode to see if Brenda's Espresso Shots episode has already dropped. So Brenda, I was thinking maybe we should kick things off today before we get into what you are doing right now in your current role at Orica, that we could touch on a topic that you've gotten into on your wonderful YouTube series, Chronicles of a Female Engineer. I love that title. And that is starting off with some myth busting around what engineers actually do and what the field is really like. You actually did touch on this at the end of our Espresso Shots episode, but let's just kick things off now at the beginning of this main Time for Coffee interview, kind of myth busting what an engineer actually does, because there are an awful lot of misperceptions.
Yes, yes, they certainly are. So people often think that engineering is for boys. And I think the premise of this myth comes because people think engineers work on cars and they make buildings. And that's really the knowledge that people have. So if you ask some high school, primary school girls and students, what does an engineer do? Maybe they make cars and make buildings. So that's the initial myth that I like to bust, because engineers are very broad, and engineers can work on coding, they can work in computers, chemical engineers work in water, food manufacturing, they can make beers and alcohol in distilleries, they can work in petrochemical industries, mining, and even manufacturing cars and heavy industry. So alongside those things, there's an additional number of applications, and then there's bridges and structural engineers, and so the list is endless. People also believe that engineers have got to be very analytical. They don't understand the soft skills that come into an engineer, and there's very important soft skills. So people often think, oh, I'm not good at maths, so I can't be an engineer. And yes, there are a few modules of maths that you need to do during your college and university studies. But as long as you keep track, keep up with it, ask your tutors, because everything stacks on, right? So if you don't pay attention in the first few weeks, it can be a struggle. But keep up with the content, keep stacking it on. And after second year, I haven't used mathematics in my day-to-day job for years now. So yes, it's
Really?
foundation. Yeah. So some engineering jobs do not even focus on mathematics. So that's a common misconception around engineers as well. And those are the two key ones that I really like to bust. The fact that you can work in multidisciplines, and that maths is not a must-have for the whole, for your whole career.
I really was blown away when I heard you mention that on your YouTube series. I thought, well, of course math would be foundational. So what kind of math? What are the basics that you must take, just sort of foundational math, in order to graduate with an engineering degree?
Yes, so there is a lot of statistics that's involved. You do a lot of thermodynamics, and what that bases on is, even I've lost touch of what's involved, but statistics is the main one that you bank on, and complex theories, your Pythagoras theorem, etc. I mean, look, I actually, it's a few, to be honest, I haven't used it in so long that I don't even remember what the subjects are called in university. But it's there for a moment in time. It's there for a year or two. Focus, get the help you need, get some extra tutorial sessions if you need to. Just keep up and pass so that you can get on to the more juicy subjects that you want to, and make your way out to the industry that excites you.
You can always
That's my
take
advice.
free classes on Khan Academy and learn
Yes,
about
exactly.
this. There's Coursera, there are other places where you can go and take a cheaper class, maybe than what you would be paying in school, or something to supplement your studies. Fantastic. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, Brenda, let's dig into what the heck you do as a continuous improvement manager of continuous manufacturing at Orca. What is a continuous improvement manager?
So a continuous improvement manager is essentially someone who looks to improve systems, processes, and workflows for the benefit of reducing costs, reducing the time it takes to do an activity, and essentially improving the experience overall. So in my role, I am responsible for standardizing the systems and processes that we use on our site, and predominantly the safety systems. So I have had the pleasure of introducing a new management of change system and a new permit to work system from our historical systems that are being offloaded, and really helping people understand the why, what's the benefits of our new system, how does it work well for you, because everyone wants to know what's in it for them. And also creating the new standards and training that will facilitate the implementation of these new processes.
So could you take us into a typical day? We are doing this interview here in mid-January of 2021. The coronavirus is in Australia, even though it is much, much, much better there than it is here in the United States, but you are working from home. What does it look like? Maybe you could take us into what it's like now and what it was like before the coronavirus hit, when presumably you were in an office.
Yes, so what it's like now at home is, I suppose, plenty of meetings. And really these meetings are around multiple facets. So I'll sort of get into the day and I'll have a look at the prior day's performance on all our plants. So I'll review the performance and see if we've had any incidents overnight, see if we've made any how we tracked in terms of production, and also if there was anything that was highlighted as an issue. So this really helps me to sort of keep track of what are our customers, what are our sites finding as issues that could potentially become bigger in the future. So this is more for me to keep track and keep a finger on the pulse before something gets bigger than, than her. So that's the first aspect. And then the next thing is really to start having some meetings with the sites, particularly around projects that I'm running. So right now I've got some projects around migration to a new document management system that I'm progressing. So there may be a couple of meetings with my 4 different sites around how they're progressing with that, looking at creating a procedure and getting that reviewed from the various stakeholders, as well as then catching up with people to collate our weekly reporting. So I also coordinate the reporting for our division. So it's a little bit of a multi-hatted role. And again, it's a role where I don't have direct influence over the outcome. I need to liaise with plenty of stakeholders, get resources on their plans, find time for their people to attend training, find time for them to advise on where they've gotten to into certain milestones for my project. And so, yes, a lot of talking. And the only difference, I guess, or the main difference with now and when I was based on a site or in an office where I can go outside and perhaps do some safety interactions. So I typically like to go out and see people in action, people who are perhaps operating a plant or people who are working in a lab or in the workshop, and sort of understand, hey, what are you working on today? What are the safety hazards you're exposed to as a part of this job? And how are you controlling yourself? How are you avoiding, getting hurt, and ensuring that you go home in the same way that you came to work today? So that's the key difference between being in the office and obviously having a chit chat and stopping by people's desks and having a
Absolutely.
discussion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. So when you talk about the plants that you're interfacing with, what are those plants actually producing? What are they working on?
So the continuous manufacturing plants are making an oxidizing agent, which is used in the explosives industry. So we typically have ammonia plants, ammonium nitrate plants, nitric acid plants, and cyanide plants. So these are the plants that I'm referring to when I say walking around in the plant. And essentially, they're massive. They're a large footprint, full of pipes and valves and large networks of tubes, tanks, things on a large scale. So you're walking around. Most of the stuff happens within within the tank, so you don't really see things flowing around. You mainly go on your computer. So right now I can probably go onto my computer and look at the process and make sure everything's at the right temperature and operating fine. So I can sort of dial in now and have a look at how things are trending.
Well, that would
So
actually
that's,
be kind of cool. Are you able to do that and share your screen?
oh, not right now. No, I can't do that right now.
Okay. Oh, because that would be super cool. I had to ask. So prior to the current job that you have, you actually worked as a senior manufacturing engineer on ammonia. What did that entail?
So as a senior manufacturing engineer, my role was really around creating the processes, standard processes, again, sort of similar to what I segued into in my current role. So fine-tuning the systems and processes that help our operators on the field, so those on the ground, operate the ammonia plant. So this is creating work instructions that are streamlined, updating procedures to start up and shut down the process, clarifying process control instructions. So really providing the support information that helps not only our operators to run the plants, but also our maintainers when they need to come in and maintain a plant. How do they need to make sure they leave that in a safe situation for us to start the plant back up again?
Cool. And prior to that, you worked on uranium in
Yes.
solvent extraction, and I have no idea what that means or what it entailed, Brenda.
Yeah, so it's very complex. I don't know how I can simplify it, but essentially, solvent extraction is a separation process. And what it's done, mining essentially is a process where let's talk about the front end of the process. You dig up a whole lot of dirt, and you really want to separate that dirt so you can get the valuable mineral, which in this case was uranium. So it has to go through a whole lot of processes. You need to grind that rock so it becomes a lot smaller. Then you need to add acid and various chemicals so you can leach out the valuable mineral into a solution. But now you want to separate that solution even more so it can become concentrated. So if you think of like your concentrated dishwashing fluid, versus like something that's not concentrated, a small little drop makes for big, washing up in your in your sink. So similarly, you want to sort of concentrate all that up, and solvent extraction is a process that concentrates up your uranium into the final product. So it's a separation process. You're discarding all the other minerals, for example, copper, gold, and silver that could also be in the solution. And then you're only treating the uranium and getting that to a final product. And we used to ship that through to France and some European clients where they use that for electricity generation.
Got it. I would imagine that it's used in nuclear plants. Is that right?
Correct.
Uranium?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
for electricity generation and sometimes for some other things. But um, so you spent many years as a metallurgist. I should have looked up this answer before, but I'm going to ask it. So is uranium is not a metal, right? So what's the difference between being a metallurgist and what you did with uranium?
Okay, so being a metallurgist. So metallurgists are really responsible for that system of extraction that I mentioned, the process of extracting valuable minerals from a bulk product. So metallurgists can work in any application. So essentially, we extract any mineral from any sort of bulk product. So that's why I could work in a gold industry and extract gold. Be responsible for the processes that extract gold, for the processes that extract copper. So as a metallurgist, you're sort of working in tandem. So the geologists are the ones on the front end. So geologists will assign, like they'll use drilling and they'll understand where the valuable metal is located, and they'll blast over there, and that stuff comes up to the ground and it comes to my end, to the processing facility. And this is where the metallurgist looks after the processing. And this is the stages in which you have to process it. Like I mentioned, you need to grind the rocks first, get them down to a small size. You need to use cyclones and things that separate the fines from the bulks, solids. This is getting really technical. And then you add different chemicals, and then you let things settle. So you let you let your solids settle, and then you get the liquor on top. You get that liquor, and you do further processing. So it's quite intense and quite time bound as well. So you'll notice that a lot of these manufacturing and mining facilities work 24 hours a day, and it's a continuous process and just continues to flow. You continually have fresh ore coming up from the ground. It keeps getting processed, and you end up with a drum of uranium oxide. You end up with a copper plate, which gets stacked in a stack of plates and gets sent to on a railway or on a port to the customers for further processing, and whatever that can be in the steel industry, in iron ore manufacturing, and all sorts of different industries use these products to make electricity. For example, at our ammonia facility, one of the byproducts is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is actually used in soda, like to make your Coca-Cola and your Pepsi. So in bottling, so there's all these side industries where the byproducts can also be used. So very interesting indeed.
Love it. Love it. I just want to go back to something you mentioned when you were talking about the separation process. You said that there's a liquor that floats
Yes.
on top. What did you mean by that? The liquor?
Yes, so if you can imagine, we've got rocks and dirt. So let's say an easy way for me to explain it is to use dirt. So if you add dirt and water, so if you had a big cup of dirt, and you add water to it, and you mix it all up, right? You're going to have murky water on top, and your solids are going to sit on the bottom. So you now take that murky water, because essentially the acid and the chemicals you've added have caused the minerals to now be in the water section. So you can take that murky water and you add some more products to that, and the stuff that comes out of that is now a new product. And that's the product you want. So each step, each process is intentionally moving your mineral from one state to another state. So I like to think of maybe copper as an easy one that we used to use in our science experiments, when copper sulfate turns blue when you add certain compounds to it. So that's the mineral changing state. So that's essentially what you're doing, continually changing the state of the minerals and getting it into various forms until you get your final product.
Yes, there's a television show that actually went into that, not with that substance, but with something else called Breaking Bad. Am I right?
Yes.
It was the whole separation process, Brenda. So I also want to touch on something else you mentioned, which was about how it's a 24-hour process, because on your YouTube series, you actually devoted one entire episode to the unspoken challenges that engineers working on a mine site have to deal with. Specifically, there were 3 things that you had been unaware of, one of which was the shift work. Could you talk
Yes.
about that?
So the shift work is very intense. So like I mentioned, 24-hour operations. So they typically have 2 shifts, a day shift and a night shift. And they will be 12-hour shifts by nature. And you often need to arrive on time or a little bit before your shift, so you can understand what's been happening, get a bit of a handover process happening. And oftentimes, I mean, I was lucky. My mine site, I lived, maybe 9 kilometers away from the mine. So my journey was about, 10 minutes on the bus.
Where
So
was this?
this is in Roxby Downs in South Australia. So about 6 hours north of Adelaide. Was a remote mining town with about 5,000 people. And most of those people work on the mine site in some form or other, or in the little town. And what that entailed was waking up at 5 o'clock or so, getting your gym workout in, going in, having breakfast, and getting on the bus and getting into the town. If you had a car, you could drive as well. And then once you get there, you want to get there 5:45 or so, get changed into your high-vis protective equipment, and then get into the changeover meeting and understand what's happened over shift. If you're running the concentrator process, maybe you want to have the handover with the person that you're handing over from. They'll let you know, oh, I missed the sample, or something's a little bit off spec. Can you make sure you check it out in the first 20 minutes or so? So they'll let you know what needs to be handed over, what needs to be done. And then you go through the rest of the day, taking samples, writing reports, generating investigations, or following through and talking to people about, hey, what happened on this day? And a number of things. So my role throughout the 12 hours differed depending on which position I was in, because I was a metallurgist, and then I moved to a senior role, and then I was an operations superintendent. So that's different applications across those roles. But after that, you'd finish up the day, towards 6 o'clock, and have another meeting, hand that over to the night shift, get home, maybe do some exercise, eat, and you're so buggered by the end of it. You want to have another early night because you're waking up early again. So it does take a lot out of you. Some sites, the mine is actually 30 minutes, 45 minutes away. So you're waking up at 3:30, 4 a.m. in the morning, and you're getting home at 7:30 at night. So before you know it, 15 hours of your day has been dedicated to something that's work related.
And you
So
mentioned, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that in this YouTube video that sometimes those 12-hour shifts could run for 4 days. Sometimes they could run for 10 days, and then you would get a number of days off after that. But you really were unprepared for how grueling it was going to be, and kind of how lonely it would be as well.
Yes. So when I had started my role at the mine site, I was doing a Monday to Friday job, and that was 10 hours. So I knew, the long hours were there, but definitely shifting into a shift roster and waking up, and particularly night shift is a challenging one, because you sort of need to be asleep during the day when people are, when there's traffic outside, or people are hustling and bustling outside your room and making noise, and it's bright outside. So trying to get decent sleep during the day so you can work a night shift. And, it gets lonely because people are not awake when you're doing your job, or people are at different parts of their day. So if you're meant to be sleeping while people are awake, then it gets lonely. And also you're in a remote location, you're alone. There's not many people to talk to outside of the workplace, and you've only got a few hours where you actually feel alive enough to do much, that you just don't want to communicate. So you end up, it's almost like a Swiss cheese effect. Everything lines up such that you're tired, you're lonely, you don't have time to really have deep connections to network, and you're in a strange place. I mean, this was 6 hours away from my common friends, my friends and family that I knew, having to learn to make new friends, and get a new social network. So lots of things that come into play as you transition into a remote mining site role.
And then as a woman, I think there was another layer of challenge. And you mentioned that it's changing, but I'd have to imagine it hasn't changed quickly enough. So you would have to wear, because you're dealing with different compounds that are extremely dangerous. So you would have to wear protective gear,
Correct.
and that gear wasn't made for a petite woman or a regular sized woman. It was made for a man, whether that be the jackets or the boots.
Certainly, and that's correct. So often my jackets would be way over my my arms, so you're trying to like shovel it on, but you're cold. So if it's winter, you want your jacket and you need to be warm. So you kind of, it's a catch-22. Pants perhaps not really designed for the feminine waist, or they don't sit just right. So you got to have your belts. Socks, some ladies tell me they need to wear double socks just so that their boots, the boots that you have to wear, if you don't have the right size for females, you want to, put double socks on so you can minimize the blisters and things that will come as a result of that. So really, as women who've come through the industry, they've now started to I even know one lady who's started to design, safety equipment, particularly for women, simply because we're becoming more prevalent in the industry. Shirts that are tailored to our bodies, pants that fit, jackets in our sizes, and even cool colors like pink and purple are also things that are on the menu now. So that's really exciting to see. Pink hats, pink hard hats, and those sort of things, paraphernalia that just makes you feel like you belong, makes you feel included. And it may not have been on the agenda before, but certainly now a lot more discussion is around this topic.
So, what is it like for a woman engineer in your industry? We haven't touched on this yet. What has it been like? Have there been other challenges because of your gender being in this space? And what do you think our young listeners can expect to find getting into this industry in 2021 versus when you joined 15 years ago?
Yes, so I think there's certainly been some decent changes. I still hear lots of people talking about a boys' club, and I guess that's by virtue of a male-dominated industry. We're going to see that there's plenty more men around than women. But I certainly find there's a lot of support for women. There's a lot of people are now embracing women and wanting more women on the table. And really, I've now started to speak up a lot more and make sure I ask questions, and I'm involved actively, because I think part of the conversation, that's why I'm passionate about empowering women in the industry. Andrea, if you've seen some of my chronicles, I talk about how to build your visibility in the industry, because as I inspire and as the industry inspires more women to join, we want them to be in a position where they actually speak up and start to challenge things that have been the norm. Like I said, this, PPE, personal protective equipment for women, wasn't on the agenda because perhaps there weren't many women around, and no one spoke up about how uncomfortable it was, or how when you're on maternity leave, when you're pregnant, you have to just have your shirt with the buttons unbuttoned because there is no maternity style top. You just have to unbutton your shirt, your top. So it's around challenging the norm and speaking up and trying to be a face for change, essentially. So in 2021, things that you can still expect are that you are an engineer. So come in being confident in your skills, come in being willing to learn, come in wanting to ask questions, demonstrate what you're doing, like keep people abreast of what you've been doing, the challenges that you've overcome in the industry, projects that you've worked on, and just let people know what you're up to, right? Because I think women like to work under the under the radar. We don't like to self-promote. We don't like to talk about what we're doing. We think we can just put our heads down, bum up, and people will know what we're up to. But oftentimes we need to, let people know what we're up to. So I think that provides a small spotlight into the industry. I know there will be challenges. A lot of my friends sometimes get called diversity hires now. So there's another face to this challenge, Andrea. As we inspire more women in, some people, people will be like, oh, you were just hired because you're a woman. So there's another layer where we need to also prove that we're worthy to be here, and we've got the skills and we've got the experience that has allowed us to be in this space. So hold your heads high, be prevalent, and show up and keep talking about what you're doing. I think that's
You
my
can
advice to women.
see or hear why Brenda makes such a magnificent coach for engineers. So, yay. Brenda, I want to flash back very quickly to when you were in university. You went to the University of Newcastle and you got a bachelor's of engineering in chemical engineering, a member of the honors class, by the way. You graduated in 2006. Just very quickly, did you know what you were going to do with your degree when you graduated?
No. Oh, well, when I graduated, yes. When I entered chemical engineering, I wanted to be a cosmetics. I wanted to manufacture cosmetics. I was an 18-year-old who loved the L'Oreal ads because you're worth it. And I was like, I'm into that. I want to make some lipstick and cosmetics face powder. But when I got to my third year in engineering, and we typically do our summer internships and get our experience in the third year, there were no cosmetic companies. There was no pharmaceuticals. I was like, hey, what am I going to do? So there was mining, and there was water, there was food, and there was manufacturing. And I come from a small mining town back in Zimbabwe, which is where I'm from. And so I thought, well, let me just try this mining game and see what this is all about. And I was actually very excited with the industry, the variety of challenges that it proposed, and the ability to turn dirt into gold. That was like profound. And I was like, this is this is still pretty
A
cool.
lot better than makeup.
Exactly. And so I spent many years in the mining industry and then pivoted into the manufacturing industry, which still used a lot of the similar skills that I used in mining as well.
I've already mentioned that your first job out of university, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was as a metallurgist at Ansto. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So were you involved in extracurriculars, Brenda, while you were in university that in hindsight actually had prepared you, had given you skills that you found valuable once you got out into the working world?
Yes, so I was involved in some of the campuses, the social campuses on social clubs on campus. I was a treasurer for the Campus Christian Movement, which was one of the organizations there, and that helped me to liaise and work as part of a committee to provide reports and that sort of thing. So that got me into the game quite early. I also was a part of the as I mentioned before, maybe not in this section, I was an intern at the BHP Technology Center. So they had a little center outside of my university, which was running some pilot plants, and they were 24 hours as well. But they were split up into 8-hour shifts. So you had a morning shift, an afternoon shift, and a night shift. So the afternoon and night shifts were pretty good for me to juggle a morning lecture and then head over and do a shift in the afternoon and get paid for it. So this was really handy to get something that had experience and value in my discipline, and allowed me to then set myself up for the job that I got after I graduated.
Fantastic. Was there more?
Yes. So what else did I get involved in extracurricular wise? I think that's pretty much, those are the two key things. So if you can get involved, I think I was also part of the debating club. And so really being in a position where I was exercising my communication skills and trying to influence people to my side of the table, I found that that was quite a handy skill to bring forth into the industry as well.
Oh, I have no doubt whatsoever. I want to let our viewers know that in just a couple of minutes, if you have questions for Brenda, she has kindly agreed to stick around to answer your questions. But I just have two quick final time for coffee questions to squeeze in here. Brenda, I try to ask all of my guests if they would share a time in their professional life when they struggled, because I think it's very easy for college students, especially for young professionals, to look at someone who's got 15 years of experience and sees all of the impressive titles and whatnot and think, she just sailed through her career and there were never any times when she struggled or maybe even failed, because I strongly, strongly believe failure is the way that we learn, and it shouldn't be seen as a scarlet letter, but rather a badge of honor. And I ask this question of my guests also because I'm not looking to embarrass you. I'm looking to empower our young viewers and our young listeners. So Brenda, is there a quick story that you could share? And most importantly, how you persevered and if there was a lesson that you learned in the process?
Yes. So I think one of my highlights or lowlights, I suppose, that comes to mind in terms of this challenge was when I was in my operations superintendent role. And I was actually at BHP at the time, working on a time when we had one of our plants in the uranium solvent extraction. When I was in that role, we were one of the plants was offline. Sorry, it was our copper solvent extraction, and one of the copper sections was off, and the other one was on. And what this meant was that the offline one had multiple people working in it and trying to fix pumps and trying to, take the scale out and clean out the tanks and vessels. So essentially, everything was open, if you want to call it open heart surgery, on one plant, and the other plant was operating as per normal. So the challenge here was really trying to deal and manage two work groups, my day-to-day work group and the contractors who were external and had to be directed and had to work safely and not interact essentially with the other work groups. So I found that this was challenging, particularly because my ball had to, handle juggling priorities, and we had a small incident, quite close to the front of the offline operation. And so I think this was challenging because I was like, oh my gosh, we should have thought about this. We should have known that this wasn't covered. Right. And I think my boss at the time was like, how did we not think about this sort of thing? So really what I had to do was take ownership of the oversight, quickly put into action a control measure to prevent this from happening again, and ensure that I had additional support. So I actually asked my maintenance manager to help support in this aspect and to also flag anything that his team may have identified throughout the course of that period where we had both plants online and offline. And I think what it taught me was that it's okay to not always find out everything. What's important is the recovery, right? I could have, been like, woe is me, I should have seen this coming and been down in the dumps, but really picking yourself up after that the downturn and taking the learning from it and really just moving forward and ensuring that it doesn't happen again. So I think time and time again now, failures almost don't scare me. Like they're sort of like, they empower me simply because I know that there's a learning that is behind it. Like, what can I actually take? It's only a failure if I don't learn something from it. So, take that event, take that issue that you found, assess it, analyze what went wrong, what went right, and what can you improve for next time, and do it.
Oh, such great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us, Brenda. Final question. If you could go back to university and do it all over again, but based on the incredible wisdom that you have today, what advice would you give yourself, Brenda?
Don't be afraid to try something new and give everything you put your hand to your all. Take initiative. Just take one step at a time. You don't have to know the full journey. Just take the next best step.
Fantastic. I don't have my phone on me. I can't message our listeners. I don't think there are any questions. I'm afraid I may have asked all of the questions, but anyway, Brenda is the creator of the Chronicles of a Female Engineer. It is a YouTube series that I highly recommend you take a look at because it really does demystify what an engineer does. It gets into all different topics, how to get ahead in the industry from entry level to management, how to develop mindset. We didn't even really get into that, but Brenda, as you can hear, is a very upbeat woman. Positivity is something that is hugely important to her, and it's something that she tries to model to her students and to her team members. You can check that out. Brenda, I want to thank you so much for making time for coffee today with me and the Time for Coffee community, and for being the very first Time for Coffee guest to be simultaneously streamed live on LinkedIn. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been a pleasure. You have managed this conversation very, very well and made it comfortable for me to do this as a very first time with you as well. So thank you so much for that.
LinkedIn high five. There we go. From the US to Australia. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. The poor thing. Now your workday begins, right?
Correct.
I'm so sorry. Gee, it's, what time is it here? Oh, it's 5:30. All right. Well, I was going to say it is happy hour time here in the US. But nevertheless, I will give you a cheers with my coffee.
Thank you so much for this discussion, Andrea. Really appreciated it.
Oh, such a pleasure. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in, those who tuned in live and those who will be watching afterwards. And by the way, this little banner here that I've had over my head, the Time for Coffee podcast, please check it out. It has hundreds of interviews with professionals like Brenda in all different industries. It's a resource that I've created to help college students, to help university students and young professionals learn from the people who are in these industries, in these jobs, doing it day in, day out. Brenda, good day to you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, your week, and hope it's an amazing year for you.
Same to you. Thanks, Andrea.